Charles C. Johnson, and his new book is called Why Coolidge Matters: Leadership Lessons from America's Most Underrated President. Charles is an investigative journalist and author and a former contributor to the Daily Caller. He has just launched GotNews.com last week, and he spent a lot of time talking about that Mississippi race. He has written for the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, American Spectator, Claremont Review, and National Review Online, and the Weekly Standard. Charles Johnson's work on exposing corruption and fraud in elections, government, and federal policy has placed him on several national shows and networks, as well as numerous talk radio programs, including I just was listening to a news conference this morning, and networks, as well as numerous talk radio programs, including I just was listening to a news conference this morning that he was pretty exciting. So please welcome Charles Johnson.
Thank you for having me. Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. I know there are a lot of questions on Mississippi, and we can get to those. I know that there are a lot of people who potentially don't like me because of things I've tweeted, and we'll get into that. We can, smack it around. I know there are a lot of establishment people and then not establishment people, and all the various permutations that exist. But for the moment, because I've been asked to speak about this, and also because it's awesome, I'm talking about my book, Why Coolidge Matters: Leadership Lessons from America's Most Underrated President. Now, you might ask, which a lot of people would, why would somebody in their 20s write a book about the last red-headed president? I mean, it seems like a strange thing to do, doesn't it? And why would somebody in their 20s write about a president who was around in the 1920s? Like, what's the deal? What's this all about? I mean, there's this other Coolidge book, right, Amity Shlaes's, right, who has a certain perspective on Coolidge. I have a different one, which is that Calvin Coolidge, and by the way, this book is one of 3 that's been endorsed by Ted Cruz, who I hope might be another president in the near future. But this book, my basic argument of this book is that history matters, and that there's so much about our history that we, as those of us on the right, know that isn't so, as Reagan put it, and ought to know but don't, because the left controls our curriculums and essentially controls our minds. Now, Coolidge, why is Coolidge interesting? Coolidge lived in a time in which there were riots, there were all these questions about immigration, there were fights with public sector unions. They didn't call them public sector unions then. There were fights about the very nature of government. There were fights over the education. How should our colleges look? What should they be teaching? And he won on every one of these issues. He actually transformed the nature of government. And he used things, this very shy, kind of dry wit of a man, used the technology of his time, radio, to go and get his message out to the whole country. He's the first president to appear on radio, to appear on television, on film. They didn't have television yet in those days. And he's the first president, or the last president, rather, to write his own speeches. And we know that a young man somewhere in the Midwest was listening to him on the radio, and that he actually decided that he would go into radio because of what he heard from Calvin Coolidge. That man, of course, was Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan, of course, took Coolidge's portrait and hung it in the Oval Office. He was criticized. People condemned Reagan for doing this. After all, Coolidge is a do-nothing president, right? That's what we've all been taught in our commie classes, right? I mean, that's what people told us, right? It's basically like Woodrow Wilson, he's awesome, right? World War I, like expansion of government, cool. And then they go into like, oh, those terrible Republicans who used the market, and they basically made mom and pop starve to death, right? I mean, that was the whole Great Depression. Republicans gave us the Great Depression. Let me contend that is entirely garbage. And we can go into exactly why it's garbage. I go into it at length in my book. But essentially, Coolidge is the last president to pay down the debt. He's the last president to actually massively, during the 1920s, they're one of the most expansionist times in human flourishing, right? We've got literacy rates are increasing. Women are actually involved in the workplace. Coolidge is, at the same time that FDR is insisting that photos of himself with blacks be destroyed, Coolidge is going and partying at the Negro Leagues baseball games. He signs a law that makes Native Americans citizens, and not just makes them citizens, but at the same time he joins Native American tribes, because his argument is if they can join our tribe, I should be able to join their tribe. So we have a long, proud history with Coolidge, and it's my contention that American history runs essentially from the founders through Lincoln, Lincoln to Coolidge, and we can debate Lincoln ad nauseum. I highly recommend Harry Joffe's work on this. I am, of course, of the Claremont School, which many of you, I recommend that you read the Claremont Review of Books. And what essentially happens is Lincoln, then Coolidge, then Reagan, then the Tea Party movement, and then potentially Cruz or Rand or whatever. Pick your poison. And that's my kind of contention on history. Now, I am a believing Christian. Coolidge was a believer as well. He was actually one of our most religious presidents. He colored a lot of his speeches with religious allusions. And what he was doing is he made this argument, which I think is essential right now for conservatives to grasp, which is that man has a spiritual nature. And that if you touch the spiritual nature, as he understood it, you can actually transform government. And I know that there are a lot of probably scoffing of our libertarian friends who are, reading Ayn Rand and are atheists and whatever. But nonetheless, I think this is true. This is why Coolidge was able to give speeches in all different Ayn Rand and are atheists and whatever. But nonetheless, I think this is true. This is why Coolidge was able to give speeches in all different audiences and actually have win sizable majorities of ethnic groups that had previously never voted Republican again, and that have not voted Republican since Coolidge. And so I think that this kind of approach to politics of, as Coolidge liked to quote it, "You shall know the truth and it shall set you free," that this kind of approach is actually essential for people who are of limited government mindsets. It might surprise you that one of our most religious presidents was also the last president to actually trim government and actually cut government. And he gave a lot of arguments for why this is the case. And this kind of messes with our idea that compassionate conservatives or libertarians and all these different things are all at war with one another. It's not quite the case. Now, I'm happy to kind of go into Coolidge. I'm also happy to go into Mississippi Senate race. But before I go into the Mississippi Senate race, let me say a few things. I've actually been to Mississippi, right? How many people in this room have been to Mississippi, just by a show of hands? Right? Good. So you're not all sucked into the Beltway. This is good. What I would say is that if you saw the racist radio, or heard the racist radio ads, if you heard the robocall, if you saw the flyers, these are all things that I found when I was in Mississippi. I was invited to go down there by the Tea Party Express to embed with them. I wasn't paid, drank a bunch of mint juleps, had a good old time. But I was noticing what was going on in Mississippi, and it disgusted me because this is a stolen election. And I have lots of documentation that I've been releasing, been helping Matthew Boyle at Breitbart. There's a lot of stuff that will continue to come out. Now, some of my tactics you're probably reading about, they're unorthodox, right? They're probably a little strange, right? Who, after all, sets up a GoFundMe account and encourages people to give him money, some of which he then uses to bribe a reverend to go and tell them about allegations of voter fraud? Kind of a weird thing to do, right? But let me submit to you that there's a lot of stuff that the conservative movement for a long time has played, and they played by certain Marquess of Queensberry rules, and they've been losing. And fight after fight, on issue after issue, we've been losing. And the country reflects our losing. And state after state, county after county, place after place, we lose. And so what we have to do is we have to start thinking strategically. I was a competitive chess player in high school. I played poker, helped pay my way through college playing poker. We need to start being strategic and having fun. And so there's a certain sense to which those of us who are young in the room, we have a certain way in which we can actually change things in this country. And after all, it's going to fall to us. A lot of the folks who are out there now, they're too invested in the system the way it is. And it's going to fall to those of us who have camera phones, the James O'Keeffes of the world, the Hannah Giles of the world, the dearly departed Andrew Breitbarts of the world, who think outside the box about how to solve these problems. Now, I will tell you, I have a lot of material on Menendez that's yet to come. I've helped the FBI on a number of projects. I intend to continue because I believe journalists should first and foremost be after truth and after justice. And so I will continue to help law enforcement as necessary. And I have gotten in contact with the FEC. And my friend Rick Shafton over there in the back, he and I were in front of the national media today doing a press conference showing how the NRSC and how a number of other kind of establishment conservative organizations were violating FEC rules with what they were doing in Mississippi. And all this stuff is coming out. I commend that you come to gotnews.com. I will actually pay you, unlike some other places you could work for. I actually believe in freedom and money, and actually if you do the work, you should probably be paid a just wage. I mean, I know this is a novel concept for a lot of interns. I promise you it gets better. But with that, I'll take some questions. Anything, hit me. Whatever you got, any rumors you heard, let's go. So anything. Anyone? Yes. And if you'd say your name just so we can be Facebook friends, you could follow me at Chuck C. Johnson, and we can like keep this going later. That'd be cool too.
Kevin Baird from Pennsylvania. I think at times thought I was isolationist. So if you want to talk a little bit about maybe his foreign policy ideas.
Yes, great question. Thank you for asking it. There's a chapter in my book dedicated on this topic. You should all buy it. I'll even give you a discount on it because I like all of you and I'm grateful for being here. But let me just say on the foreign policy question, this is a great question, right? There's this attitude that a lot of our neoconservative friends have that the 1920s, basically they just cut the government, they cut the Defense Department, and that's what gave us World War II. I don't ascribe to that view. First of all, it's historically wrong. It's wrong in this sense. There was this Kellogg-Briand Pact that did, pretend to outlaw war. But Coolidge was very clear at the time that this was signed that you can't outlaw war any more than you can legislate peace. He thought this was a ridiculous idea. He nevertheless thought, though, that what needed to happen after World War I was military reductions. And he encouraged the Japanese, the British, he encouraged the French, all to follow international arbitration agreements to reduce. Remember, he doesn't have World War II yet. So he doesn't have to, this hasn't yet happened. And so everyone's reducing naval armaments, and by and large it's working until people start to realize, looks like the Japanese and the British are cheating. So what is Coolidge's final act in March 1929 of his presidency? It's to sign a bill authorizing the first aircraft carrier. It's also to sign a bill authorizing the first cruisers. And he was of the view, when it comes to military intervention, that as John Quincy Adams put it, that we are the friends of liberty everywhere, but custodian only of our own. I think a lot of our neoconservative friends have this idea that we need to be militarily involved in countries where we do not know the culture, we do not know the way of life, in order to have our foreign policy advanced. I don't hold that view. I'm of the Angelo Codevilla school. If you've read some of his stuff, I highly recommend it. I'm of the view that rubble makes no trouble, that a strong United States is not necessarily a United States that intervenes militarily in every country. Coolidge is of that view as well. And so he would get involved, and he did get involved in a number of skirmishes in Mexico, in the Caribbean. And so he was not kind of a do-nothing kind of military type. He was very loved and respected by the military. And so he had a record that was quite successful on this front. Now, as for what came afterwards, I mean, arguably, my grandfather, you can Google this, it's true. It was a Rear Admiral, Dwight Lyman Johnson, Navy Cross winner. There were a number of people who in the 30s took the position that there's this view that disarmament occurred because basically there weren't big enough armies in Europe, right? This is a common idea. Turns out Bruce Thornton and a bunch of other thinkers, military strategists have written it's totally not true. The German army was much smaller than the French army. Disarmament was more of a mental thing than a strategic positioning thing. And so what worries me about the United States right now is we can militarily have a much more efficient military. I mean, I've talked to Eric Prince of Blackwater fame, and he said, look, I can build you a helicopter resupply mission that has that takes out 76 people and do it with 4 people. I can build you a leaner, meaner military if you so choose. He did it, with Blackwater. He did the FedEx solution to the military. And so those of us who believe in a military, we have to understand that the purpose of a military is to secure the Constitution of the United States and to make sure that we all live as free people, right? As a free people. Not to go into savage lands and throw lots of money at defense contractors and waste a lot of that money, get a lot of stuff wrong, get a lot of people killed, and go and start, blood. A perfect example of this stupidity. You guys have seen Zero Dark 30, right? Who's seen Zero Dark 30, right? A lot of people, right? Now, in Zero Dark 30, there's a scene in which they're coming, and other people have written about this. I know this is a far field from your question, but I'm trying to answer it nonetheless in my roundabout kind of rapid-fire way. But what happens is there's a scene in Zero Dark 30 in which the CIA woman is blown up by this guy who's, has explosives in his car. What they don't tell you in real life, that guy for 2 years was selecting all of the drone targets. And so he was telling us to go assassinate people who are against his tribe's interests. So what we were doing is we were the garbage disposal service for one tribe against another. And so what bothered me the most about that is our intelligence was so lacking. And what I would say is that those of us who do believe in a strong defense, we also have to understand that information is probably our most powerful weapon in the kind of new age. And I think Coolidge understood that. He understood that warfare was changing radically. He was one of the first people to understand that the future of war was going to be fought from the air. So he was very friendly to people like Mitchell and others who understood that kind of as technology changes, battlefields change as well. And I think that's something that we on the right need to be very aware of in the future, because frankly we can't afford $900 hammers anymore. It's just not, it's not possible. It's not the right thing to do. It's immoral, and it's a waste of our taxpayers' limited resources. So yes, next question.
Right here, Jordan Hansen.
Hi there, I'm Jordan Henry from Missouri, and I know you are exactly right. In my public high school AP US history class, the general consensus on Coolidge by our teacher was, okay, he didn't do too much, so let's hurry up and blame the Republicans on the Great Depression so we can get to World War II. So what was it that first got you interested in studying so in-depth this forgotten president?
Well, first of all, there are only like 34 books on Coolidge. So it's like, all right, I'm just going to read all those. And what did it for me, which was the big thing that did it for me.
Lincoln.
Yeah, as opposed to Lincoln. I mean, like, this is not well-trod ground. I mean, there's a reason that this, and what was weird to me is that he was like ridiculously popular when he was a president. Like, people made coins out of him. They wanted him to run again in 1928. It's like, why is it that all these people believe one thing about Coolidge, and all the people who are alive, including like the 100-year-old lady that I met who voted for him, why is it that they were all so pro-Coolidge? And so I was trying to kind of figure this out, like what actually happened with the Depression. And it's my contention that the Depression is a function of many different things. One thing it's a function of is big government Republicans. There was this view that the Republican Party, shocker oh shocker, was split in two factions. One faction was very much an establishment faction that wanted to just manage everything. Their attitude was, we need a businessman to lead, an executive to lead our party. That's the Herbert Hoover faction. Then there was another faction, which was, we need a constitutional conservative, a guy who really believes in the Declaration of Independence, which was central to Coolidge's thinking. He really believed that this idea, actually, his Christian view was that as we all have a common Father and God the Father, therefore we're all brothers. And so any form of government in which I try to enslave you and you try to enslave me, be it Kaiserism in the form of the World War I, be it slavery, be it indentured servitude, all of that is against God's wish for all of us. And I go into some length on his Christian faith, why that was so important to what he was trying to do. But what happened with the Republican Party is it was split ideologically. And it realized that it could not actually defeat the Woodrow Wilson faction, unpopular though it was for an unpopular war, until it kind of combined factions. And so Coolidge was very much a part of combining that function. Nevertheless, he recognized that while Herbert Hoover was his Commerce Secretary, Herbert Hoover also was not necessarily about the kind of politically small c conservative Declaration of Independence approach to things. On the contrary, he said he dismissively referred to him as his wonder boy. He said, for 6 years that man has given me unsolicited advice, all of it bad. And he refused to endorse him until the last possible moment, which was never done at the time. And to the last possible moment, he refused to endorse him. Now, why? Because Herbert Hoover was a mining executive, a big government, he believed in sort of the progressive mindset that businessmen can run things better, right? As if we are all just kind of cogs in a machine, rather than free men and free women who want to live a certain way. And so Coolidge was very much opposed to that. And so the Commerce Secretary, how am I doing on time? Am I going to? Okay, good. All right, so the Commerce Secretary, I have a lot to say, and so I try to say it quick. But the Commerce Secretary at the time, Herbert Hoover, expanded the government massively in his own department. And many of the things that he did in the 1930s when he was president, from 28 until 32, it was FDR light. And there was no distinction between what FDR wanted to do, and philosophical distinction between what FDR wanted to do and Herbert Hoover wanted to do. They just didn't exist. It was just more of that. Kind of like with Bush and with Obama when it comes to things like TARP. There was no philosophical distinction. And so what ended up happening is obviously the Great Crash happened. We should note, by the way, that the crash of 1920 was actually much larger than the crash of 1929, just as just like an actual observable fact on the stock market. And so there were a lot of people who thought, oh, we'll just bounce back from this. After all, the recession of 1920 was pretty bad, but what did we do? You know, we cut taxes and cut government after the war. Economy came roaring back. We had the roaring 20s. What Herbert Hoover did was he increased, you know, the Smoot-Hawley tariff. There were a number of kind of big government policies that he implemented that actually probably made the Depression bigger. And it's my contention that the Great Depression is a function of FDR's kind of insane policies when it comes to interest rates and when it comes to government spending and when it comes to the climate of uncertainty he created and the demonization he did of business. And if that sounds familiar, I encourage you to open up a newspaper such as we have newspapers now today. But yeah, any other questions?
Oh, come on.
No Mississippi question?
Lincoln has a question.
Yeah,
What's your name?
My name is Lincoln Carper. I'm from St. Louis,
awesome name.
Missouri. I was going to ask you just real quickly before I ask you about Mississippi, what type of poker did you play?
What kind of poker did I play?
Yeah.
Texas Hold'em, of
Texas
course.
Hold'em. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
There
we
is
can
no
be good friends.
What is this Omaha silliness? Like, no.
Is that how you're going to fund your college education?
Yeah.
I don't recommend that. I don't recommend that, by the way. I would just say that it's a lot of fun, and I discovered at one point that it's wrong. You know, I've since kind of sullied on poker because I think it is wrong to take people's money like in that capacity. It's much more fun to do research on rhinos and hunt them for sport. So that's what I would say on that score.
Yeah, I passed the idea by my mom, and she wasn't too happy about it. But anyway, I was going to ask you about Mississippi. If you could just tell us some of the, for those of us who maybe aren't familiar with your work, summarize some of the work you have done there and tell us what exactly is going on for those of us who are maybe less well informed than we should be.
Okay, we all know that there's a controversial election that just took place for the Republican runoff, right? We're all aware of that because some people aren't aware of that even, and it's kind of shocking that they're not.
I think we are.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to start there and then we'll expand. So basically, what ended up happening is Thad Cochran, who is 76 years old, he's a little worse for the wear. You may have seen that story the other day about him going to the Democrat lunch. There's a lot of questions about his mental health and mental capacity. And he's running against Chris McDaniel, or was running against him for the Republican nomination to represent Mississippi in the United States Senate. Now, what happened? What happened was that there was a concerted effort on the part of the Haley Barbour political machine, and Haley Barbour is a former RNC chair. He's one of the most successful lobbyists in the United States. He's represented a number of dictatorships as a lobbyist. And I posted all this on Twitter. I mean, I'm not trying to sully the man. You can go and see the documents for yourself. He's a former governor of Mississippi. And as Ed Rollins, the other political consultant once put it on Charlie Rose this week, Haley Barbour owns Mississippi. And he used that owns statement. Now, this offends me just as a human being and as an American that one man can own a state. I mean, after all, these are our fellow citizens, and that seems wrong. So what I decided to do is I decided to see what was going on in Mississippi. After all, I like to bust corruption, and if you're the most corrupt state in the union, then like the journalist who likes to bust corruption should go to the most corrupt state. It just seemed kind of logical to me. So I got this invitation by the Tea Party Express to go and talk about my book on Coolidge. I had never met Chris McDaniel before. Certain press reports have identified me as a McDaniel supporter. Whatever. I mean, I'm not a big fan of his. I'm not against him, but I'm not for him either. Like, I'm not even registered to vote because, frankly, like I live in California and it doesn't really matter. And it seems like a lot of work just get up and vote. Maybe that will change, but I'm not even registered to vote, and I've been registered as all different things. And what really interests me is busting corruption. And so I go to Mississippi, and I start seeing all these flyers everywhere and hearing about these flyers in the black community, which essentially they start saying, like, Chris McDaniel is a Klansman, and he is going to come, and he is going to take away your government benefits. He's going to shut down historically black colleges. I mean, you name, like, the most absurd racist things that Democrats have said about you. Now the Republican establishment is saying it about Chris McDaniel. So naturally, like, I thought Chris McDaniel was awesome, right? So I thought, like, if they're really this targeted towards him, there must be something there that they're afraid of. And what is it, right? Because they're not actually talking about the issues. And so what they try to do is they try to get a whole number of African-American voters, and they ran a whole bunch of racist radio ads and racist robocalls. Now, you've probably seen those around. I found all of those. I posted them online. People thought I made them up. I didn't make them up. Rick back there tracked down all of the different call stations and found out who the people were that were paying for all these. And first of all these ads were produced by all white firms. So, they have this black guy come on, Reverend come on and talk, with this jazzy voice in the background. By the way, we haven't released all of the racist radio ads. We haven't released who funded all of them. But we do know right now I can publicly say, the National Republican Senatorial Committee, which, fundraises off of Defeat Harry Reid, is using money to go and produce these ads to go and target black voters and to scare them. And what they're not telling them is that if you vote as a Democrat in the primary, so the primary on June 3rd, and then vote as a Republican in the runoff, that's an illegal vote. And so what they're doing is they're scaring, and then vote as a Republican in the runoff, that's an illegal vote. And so what they're doing is they're scaring all of these poor black people, and many of them very poor in the Delta and elsewhere. Like, these are our poorest fellow citizens, right? And they're scaring them with accusations that Chris McDaniel is going to come, for them, and that he is quite literally a Klansman. He's going to bring back the battle days. He's going to bring back Jim Crow. And that's a kind of campaign that I felt was really disgusting. Now, why are they doing that, right? That's the interesting question. Why? I mean, after all, there are lots of Senate races. Why be so focused on that? Well, let me suggest that why are they doing that, right? That's the interesting question. Why? I mean, after all, there are lots of Senate races. Why be so focused on that? Well, let me suggest that Thad Cochran is going, should the Republicans take the United States Senate, Thad Cochran is going to be chief appropriator. He's going to be the head of appropriations. Now, if you're the chief lobbyist who owns a state, the most corrupt state in the country, it helps to help the head appropriator in your corner. And so that's kind of the cui bono, why do this kind of thing. Now, what happened? And I posted all the documentation. I have all Mississippi Wired, all this Mississippi housewives. I will say, hey, go get this document for me, and somebody will drive 4.5 hours and go and get it for me. I mean, people are so angry at what happened here. And what happened is that a whole number of Democrats crossed over and voted. Now, I know what you're going to say. You're probably going to say, oh, well, this is politics. Politics is an ugly business. This is terrible. But, how likely is widespread voter fraud? Well, there are an awful lot of people who have come out with allegations that are substantive, who have a lot of documentation supporting these statements, there's a lot more that will come out. True the Vote is suing. We've seen a lot of what was going on essentially in county after county is that all the little counties are controlled by the Barber machine. And in each one of these counties, they were ignoring the laws in some cases, so they were allowing people who had voted as a Democrat to vote in the Republican runoff, which they're not supposed to do if you're a clerk. They were destroying the pages that would show that people had voted previously, which is like a big felony. And what they were doing was they were running around with absentee ballot forms, and they were lying to people and registering as many people as possible. And so right now, the separation is 5,900 votes. 6,900 votes. That's the separation between these two candidates. And overwhelmingly, the Republicans voted for McDaniel in the Republican primary. And so this is going to continue to be contested, litigated. There's a lot more stuff that's going to come out. And I intend to post all of it at gotnews.com, which is my news site. Come write for me. Come work with me. Let's change the country. Let's change the world. And my basic attitude about this is this corruption needs to be called out, because if we don't stop it here, if we don't draw a line in the sand that says, and by the way, lots of people are drawing this line. Ted Cruz said he found it appalling, which you better believe that the Ted Cruz people are going to use this as a differentiation point, a line in the sand when they run against Rand Paul in 2016. We had Ed Martin of the Missouri GOP, the chair there, say that it's repugnant and there should be a full investigation. Many people have also called for any vendors that did this kind of work. And, we've gone into the minutia. Rick and I've gone into the minutia about the FEC violations of having PACs do senatorial work. And there's a lot more kind of stuff that's coming out. I mean, basically, I'm deluged with it. So if you want to help, I can also pay you to help me, too, if you're interested in that kind of
Okay, we have
stuff.
one more question from the back there, Avery.
Hi, Hannah Stevens from Michigan. I was just wondering that you just said that you're not registered to vote, but you're so deeply involved in politics. Why do you not exercise your right to vote that other countries and people would love to be able to do?
I totally agree with you. My wife is an immigrant. She votes and she likes to vote. I worked as a precinct worker in Boston before I moved to Fresno, California. Highly recommend Fresno. You can come out and join me. We can go, have some, do that kind of thing. But it's a very serious question. I would just basically put it this way. I love my country. I'm involved in the political process. One of the reasons I don't vote is I've had a number of death threats against me, saying that people would literally cut my head off. Like literally, like, and I was told by a law enforcement contact when I did some work with the FBI that I should do as much as possible. So I live in a gated community. I have a gun in every room of my house. And my wife has a different maiden name. So I should do as much as possible to avoid detection. And so that's a big reason I don't vote. Now, have I voted? I have voted in the past. I did vote in the last election because I was going to move to where I live now. I did vote for Leland Yee, the Democrat who was gun running, just because it was funny. But generally speaking, I'm very supportive of the right to vote. But I don't think when we live in a country where people steal elections and where there's such corruption in how choices are formed, that we all have comparative advantages that we have to make. And I intend to go after corrupt Republicans, as I have with Ed Cochran, as I will with others. I'm not interested in being a part of a political tribe. Right? My Christian views are such that you shall know the truth and it shall set you free. I'm not interested in being, I believe in principles shall set you free. I'm not interested in being, I believe in principles over parties and over people. And I think registering to vote and being a part of a Republican machine, while it's fun for a lot of people, and I understand that people get psychic rewards for it, and I think it's important, honestly, my value added, like I don't even leave the house to get food. I'm working all the time from 6 a.m. till 9 p.m. My wife has to literally like pull me away so we can go on date night. So like my attitude is, this is the cause of my life. I'm happy to work as long as necessary. And I don't want to sully the kind of aggressive, go after the truth message that I'm bringing by being a part of any campaign. Now that might change. If certain people were to run for president who endorse my book, I would certainly consider getting involved with their campaign. I might even do research for their super PAC. That might be interesting in the future. But as for the rest of it, I've been involved in politics. I've helped numerous people get elected. I've helped a lot of people lose very successfully. And I do agree with you that the importance of voting is extremely important. But I would also say that your right as a citizen, your rights, you have so many more rights than just the ballot box. You have the right to First Amendment expression. You have the right to petition your government. You have all these different rights. And I see the voting component as a very small piece of it. I mean, if I'm successful, which I believe I will be, and I believe the evidence is supporting it, I will have flipped a Senate seat at age 25. How wild is that, right? So, like, why not? So I take your point. It's a serious point. My wife tries to convince me of this all the time. I am worried about my safety, and I have reason to be worried about my safety. And so I'm hoping to get more people involved so that I can just sit back and collect a check like Matt Drudge. I'm trying to give you as honest an answer as I can, but it is a fair point. Lots of people do suffer for the elections, and thank you for having me. So.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, thank you.